episode 43 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, the editor at tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. Before we do that, let's do this. Let's look at our Toke Signals Bud Pick of the Week. We have here some homegrown Blue Dream. Blue Dream is a delightful strain. It's a 50-50 mix of the indica blueberry and the sativa haze. This particular example here, this flower was grown under 320 watts of LED lighting. That is a 200 watt saucer at the top and 6 20-watt tubes up and down the sides. If it sounds like I'm describing a phototron, yes I am, and I would recommend that you get an LED phototron, but they don't make them anymore. Let's do the news now, shall we? In the United States, in a huge story, Congress has voted to end the war on medical marijuana patients and providers. That's right, after years of effort and 6 previous tries, an unprecedented victory has finally happened. Congress on Thursday night approved a measure, 219 to 189, that will prevent the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration from interfering with state medical marijuana laws. This legislation marks the first time in history that Congress has voted in favor of ending the federal government's war on medical marijuana patients and providers. A record high 49 Republicans joined 170 Democrats in voting for the measure. The vote on Amendment 25 to H.R. 4660, the Commerce, Justice, Science, and Related Agencies Appropriations Act, led by Representative Dana Rohrabacher, a Republican from California, stops the Department of Justice, including the DEA, from spending funds to prevent states from implementing their own medical marijuana laws. The amendment has been offered 7 times since 2003. It received a then record high 165 votes in 2007, which included 15 Republicans. Congress is officially pulling out of the war on medical marijuana patients and providers, said Dan Riffle, Director of Federal Policies for the Marijuana Policy Project, which has been lobbying in support of the measure since it was first introduced in 2003. Federal tax dollars will no longer be wasted arresting seriously ill medical marijuana patients and those who provide to them. This is a historic vote, and it's yet another sign that our federal government is shifting towards a more sensible marijuana policy, according to Riffle. This congressional vote is a huge victory for patients, according to Steph Scherer, Executive Director of Americans for Safe Access. No longer will we have to look over our shoulder and worry when the next raid or indictment will prevent us from safely and legally accessing our medicine. This is a game changer that paves the way for much more policy change to come, Scherer said. This historic vote shows just how quickly marijuana reform has become a mainstream issue, said Tom Angel of Marijuana Majority. The last time a similar amendment came up, it didn't come very close to passing. But since then, more states have passed medical marijuana laws, and a couple have even legalized marijuana for all adults. More states are on the way later this year, and in 2016, it's clear that more politicians are beginning to realize that the American people want the federal government to stop standing in the way, Angel said. If any political observers weren't aware that the end of the war on marijuana is nearing, they just found out. This measure passed because it received more support from Republicans than ever before, Riffle said. It is refreshing to see conservatives in Congress sticking to their conservative principles when it comes to marijuana policy. Republicans increasingly recognize that marijuana prohibition is a failed big government program that infringes on states' rights. It's becoming clearer and clearer that marijuana prohibition's days are numbered, Riffle said. Polls are consistently finding that a strong majority of Americans think marijuana should be legal, and an overwhelming majority support legal access to medical marijuana. It's nice to see more members of Congress standing up for their constituents instead of standing in the way of reform. Thursday night's congressional vote came as news has widely circulated about an ongoing federal prosecution aggressively targeting patients in Washington state who were growing a modest amount of medical marijuana for their own personal use. However, the prosecution of the Kettle Falls Five, as they've become known, is now thrown into question. The DOJ has been seeking 10-year mandatory minimum to life sentences for each defendant who were in compliance with Washington state's medical marijuana law. In addition to ending all pending federal medical marijuana-related criminal prosecutions, advocates argue that current DOJ litigation against dispensary operators and their landlords, like that being waged in San Francisco, Oakland, and Berkeley, must end promptly. Thursday night's vote could also have a positive impact on defendants currently serving mandatory minimum sentences of up to 10 years in prison. In Minnesota this week, advocates are welcoming it as the 22nd medical marijuana state. At the same time, they are objecting to the overly strict restrictions in the new law. Minnesota Governor Mark Dayton on Thursday signed a bill into law officially making Minnesota the 22nd state in the nation to allow people with debilitating conditions to access medical marijuana if their doctors authorize it. Patient advocates celebrated the passage of SF 2470, which will protect some patients from arrest, prosecution, and discrimination, as well as license 2 cultivators of medical marijuana and 8 distribution centers across the state. However, advocates voiced concerns that the law prohibits smoking medical marijuana, as well as the use and possession of the dried whole plant flowers, which is the method and form most widely and effectively used, of course. A group of patients and advocates held a news conference outside of Governor Dayton's residence at 11 a.m. on Friday. They delivered 33 flowers to the governor, each of which represents 1,000 seriously ill Minnesotans who will not be able to access medical marijuana under the new law. The bill signed into law on Thursday empowers healthcare practitioners to authorize patients with cancer, multiple sclerosis, HIV, AIDS, chronic pain, seizures, and other medical conditions to access medicinal cannabis. But the law limits use of medical marijuana to oil that has been extracted from the plant using a state-licensed manufacturing process. Now, about 5,000 Minnesotans will qualify for the new program, according to a legislative analysis of the House bill on which it is based. Governor Dayton blocked a widely supported and much more effective version of the medical marijuana law, which would have allowed 38,000 seriously ill Minnesotans to access medical marijuana, according to a legislative analysis of a widely supported Senate bill. The governor promised to veto any bill, such as that Senate bill, that did not have the support of law enforcement associations. Yes, he gave law enforcement veto power over healthcare decisions. Law enforcement was neutral on that final bill, which included several restrictions upon which Governor Dayton had insisted. Under the new law, possession of small amounts of marijuana is a misdemeanor. Even qualified patients under the new program who are caught with herbal marijuana can be jailed for up to 90 days, fined $1,000, and terminated from the medical marijuana program. Nevertheless, patients who strongly prefer consuming cannabis flowers or who cannot tolerate the extracted oils approved under this new law have indicated that they will continue to violate the law in order to consume medical marijuana in the form that best meets their health care needs. The final version of the legislation will unfortunately not allow individuals suffering from intractable pain, nausea, wasting, and post-traumatic stress disorder to access medical marijuana. Advocates are vowing to further expand the program, which sets up a patient registry to monitor the health impacts of marijuana and a task force to evaluate those impacts. The law requires that Minnesota start supplying patients with medical marijuana by July 1st, 2015. Many seriously ill Minnesotans and their families have been waiting a long time to reach this point, said Heather Azzi, political director for Minnesotans for Compassionate Care. The new law holds promise for many seriously ill Minnesotans, but it also leaves many behind. Unfortunately, there are a lot of Minnesotans suffering from truly debilitating conditions who will not be allowed to access medical marijuana under the new law, according to Azzi. The legislature must come back next session, she said, ready to expand upon this bill so that all Minnesotans who could benefit from medical marijuana are able to access it. Minnesota should be commended today for trying to meet the needs of their medical marijuana patients, said Steph Scherer, executive director of Americans for Safe Access. However, because of the law's serious inadequacies, tomorrow we must roll up our sleeves and begin the process of expanding the law to more effectively meet the needs of patients. We're looking forward to the day when policymakers boast that their state medical marijuana program will help patients the most, rather than trying to adopt the most restrictive law in the country, Scherer said. In Kentucky this week, a historic development. Hemp seeds were legally planted for the first time in decades. Hemp has been legally planted now in Kentucky for the first time since the 1970s, signaling the tentative return of a crop which was once a lucrative industry for the bluegrass state. University of Kentucky researchers on Tuesday planted a small crop of 13 varieties of hemp seeds, finally released last week by the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration after pointless bureaucratic wrangling. Although the industrial hemp was an indispensable crop for Kentucky through World War II, it was the first time it had been legally planted in the state since the 70s, according to Janet Patton at the Herald Leader. University of Kentucky agronomists Rich Mundell and David Williams will supervise this hemp study. The plants are expected to sprout in 7 to 10 days and will be harvested in October. Each variety will be evaluated for its seed and fiber production. It's exciting to be working on something different, and we're very hopeful it will be successful, said Williams. Generally speaking, compared to some crops, it's not difficult to grow. But there are some things that are unknown today, Williams continued, in particular differences in the varieties of hemp we have access to today. While much of the economic interest in hemp decades ago was based on its fiber, now there's more focus on the seeds, which can be pressed for a nutritious oil which contains essential fatty acids, omega-3 and 6. Hopefully we'll find out 1 or 2 varieties that will be better for Kentucky farmers, Williams said. State Agriculture Commissioner James Comer has planned several pilot projects with state universities to measure various hemp characteristics. Comer was a strong advocate for bringing the hemp crop back to Kentucky, where it has a rich but interrupted historical tradition. Researchers at the University of Kentucky's Spindletop Farm will identify which varieties are best suited for Kentucky. They'll look at all the potential problems with weeds, disease, and insects, and they plan to measure just how much seed and fiber different varieties of hemp will yield, along with the effects of nitrogen fertilizer. We are pleased to be on the ground floor of investigation into industrial hemp in the 21st century under the leadership of the KDA, the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, said Nancy Cox, Dean of the University of Kentucky College of Agriculture, Food and Environment. Earlier this month, another plot using about 50 pounds of hemp seeds was planted at Murray State University in western Kentucky. Hemp cultivation projects are also planned with Kentucky State University, Morehead State, Eastern Kentucky U, the University of Louisville, and Western Kentucky U. Governor Steve Beshear on Friday signed emergency regulations to immediately go into effect regulating legal hemp production in the state. Agriculture Commissioner Comer, meanwhile, hopes to soon expand hemp cultivation to private farmers. The University of Kentucky's pilot program will help us recover much of the knowledge about industrial hemp production that has been lost since hemp was last grown in Kentucky, Comer said. I'm grateful to the University of Kentucky and the other institutions that are participating in the hemp pilot program, Comer said. With their help, we'll bring industrial hemp back to Kentucky, and with it, new jobs and new farm income. In Nevada this week, backers launched a ballot initiative drive which would end marijuana prohibition there. The Coalition to Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol on Tuesday launched a signature drive in support of a 2016 ballot measure that would end marijuana prohibition in Nevada. State Senator Toke, a Democrat from Las Vegas, and former Nevada Republican Senate Caucus Executive Director Joe Bresney were the first to sign the cannabis legalization petition at a news conference in Senator Segerblom's law office. Marijuana prohibition has been just as big of a failure as alcohol prohibition, Segerblom said. If we can regulate alcohol, there's no reason why we can't begin regulating marijuana in a similar fashion and raise more money for our schools. It just makes sense. The initiative would make private possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana legal for adults 21 years of age and older. It would establish a tightly regulated system of licensed marijuana retail stores, licensed cultivation facilities, licensed manufacturing facilities, licensed testing facilities, and licensed distributors. The measure would establish a 15% excise tax on wholesale marijuana sales, such as those from a cultivation facility to a retail store, and a retail marijuana tax would be subject to general state and local sales taxes. All revenue from the 15% excise tax will be deposited in the distributive school account, which funds K-12 education in Nevada. Regulating marijuana will replace the underground market with a tightly controlled system of legitimate tax-paying businesses, Bresney said. It will generate significant new revenue for our state that would otherwise benefit cartels and other criminal enterprises. Our law enforcement officials will be able to spend more time addressing serious crimes instead of enforcing failed prohibition policies, Bresney pointed out. Speaking of big changes, there's a big positive change in Washington state this week. In Washington, parolees will be allowed to smoke marijuana starting on June 1st. In a refreshing bit of if it's legal, it's legal. Parolees in Washington state will be allowed to smoke marijuana starting on June 1st, according to the Washington Department of Corrections. This new policy will permit the state's 14,000 parolees to use cannabis just like any other adult in the state under I-502. That's the legalization measure approved by voters in 2012. Interestingly, the DOC didn't change its policy until recreational marijuana was legalized by state voters. Medical marijuana patients on parole have for years been denied their medicine in Washington state, despite their demonstrated medical need for it. We're putting some changes into effect so that we won't routinely test offenders in the community for THC, said Anne Marie Elwood, Assistant Secretary at the Department of Corrections. The DOC routinely tests parolees' urine for traces of 6 types of drugs, including THC, the main active ingredient in marijuana. But that list will be reduced to 5 starting on June 1st. We don't want them held to that level when, as a citizen, you wouldn't be held to that level either, Elwood said. But the DOC insists it isn't endorsing the use of cannabis. There's no way the Department of Corrections is endorsing the use of marijuana, Elwood said. We are simply aligning with state law. Now, Colorado, in contrast to Washington state, continues to prohibit its parolees from using marijuana, which is also legal there. It's one of the few instances where Washington's law seems to be better than Colorado's. Washington's correction officers have mixed feelings about the change, according to members of their labor union. We know that marijuana use can lead to behavior changes and other problems with the folks that are on supervision, said the majestically clueless Bill Copeland with the Washington Federation of Employees Corrections Committee. The actual statistics, by the way, show that crime has gone precipitously down in Colorado since legalization, despite Copeland's prohibitionist bullshitting. The Department of Corrections noted that Washington state judges will still be able to prohibit marijuana use by parolees on a case-by-case basis. DOC officials said they will continue to wield that authority as well. But crucially, the default assumption of parolees is that they will be allowed to smoke marijuana. It will take a specific prohibition on an individual before that person isn't allowed to. The state also plans to study the effect of allowing parolees to smoke weed, according to the Department of Corrections. In New York this week, the state assembly has once again passed a comprehensive bipartisan medical marijuana bill. On Tuesday, they passed the Compassionate Care Act by a bipartisan vote of 91 to 34. This is the 5th time that the Assembly has passed a medical marijuana bill, and this comes just months after the Assembly included the measure in their one-house state budget proposal. The bill remains stalled in the Senate. The bill, known as the Compassionate Care Act, would provide relief for thousands of New York patients suffering from serious and debilitating conditions such as cancer, multiple sclerosis, and epilepsy by allowing use of medical marijuana under the supervision of their healthcare provider. Patients, caregivers, and providers watched from the gallery on Tuesday as the Assembly debated and then voted overwhelmingly in favor of the bill. Once again, the Assembly has shown that it understands the needs of seriously ill patients in New York, said Donna Romano of Syracuse. And as someone who lives with MS and seizures, I know medical marijuana can help alleviate my suffering and that of thousands of other New Yorkers. I hope the Senate will finally do the right thing and pass the Compassionate Care Act now, Romano said. Now, while this bill has sailed through the Assembly, it's been long bogged down in the New York Senate. Last week, the Senate Health Committee passed the measure, S 4406B, and now the bill awaits a vote in the Senate Finance Committee. Last week, Finance Committee Chair John DeFrancisco told the press he would allow a vote on the Compassionate Care Act, but only if Senate leadership agrees to it. I applaud the leadership of the Assembly in passing the Compassionate Care Act for the 5th time, said Kate Hentz of North Salem, whose daughter Morgan suffers from severe and life-threatening seizure disorder. But my family can't keep waiting. Every day we wait is another day of seizures that could take our daughter's life. It's time for the Senate to follow the Assembly's lead and pass the bill before more seriously ill New Yorkers needlessly suffer or die, according to Hemp. 22 other states and the District of Columbia have passed medical marijuana laws. With the exception of Pennsylvania, New York is now surrounded by states that permit legal access to medical marijuana. Minnesota just became the 22nd medical marijuana state when it passed a bill to allow some patients access to marijuana. But in New York, patients must still risk being arrested just for using a medication that relieves their pain and suffering. In California this week, the Mendocino Sheriff's Office is flush with cash due to so-called marijuana restitution. Is it an inventive new way to clear marijuana cases off the docket? Or is it simply a way of separating medical marijuana patients from their money? The Mendocino County Sheriff's Department is flush with cash due to what some are calling the Mendocino model and others are calling the Mendocino shakedown. When District Attorney David Eister took over in Mendocino just over 3 years ago, he said felony cannabis prosecutions were overwhelming his staff and his budget. The cases took an average of 15 months to resolve. Now those cases clear in about 3 months, and the Sheriff's Department has plenty of cash. You see, Eister found a section of the California Health and Safety Code actually intended to reimburse police for the cost of cleaning up meth labs, and he reworked it. In exchange for paying restitution of $50 per plant and $500 per pound of processed marijuana, suspects can plead to a misdemeanor and get probation under Eister's method. The restitution is supposed to be for actual enforcement costs, according to the law, but defendants are required to waive itemized accounting, stating the amount owed is reasonable. Cash, trucks, and equipment also occasionally have to be given up under Eister's Global Restitutions Plan. The program is only available to those without criminal records or who haven't trespassed, grown on public lands, or degraded the environment. Participants in the program must agree to random searches while on probation, comply with the medical marijuana laws, and grow only for personal use. Restitution funds topping $3.7 million since early 2011 have gone directly to the cops. Asset forfeitures totaling $4.4 million in cash and goods in 2013 alone, nearly double the previous year, are shared by the state, the DA's office, and local law enforcement. But the program has many critics. Among them, Mendocino County Superior Court Judge Clay Brennan, who during a restitution hearing last year for a man with an 800 plant grow operation called it extortion of defendants. A federal grand jury looking into county programs that profit from marijuana enforcement has subpoenaed accounting records of the restitution program, Eister admitted. The reason is unclear, and the U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't comment on the investigation. Legal analysts are concerned about the potential for unequal treatment of defendants and the incentive for cops to focus on lucrative targets at the expense of those who might be more dangerous to public safety. It suggests a two-tiered system of justice where people who don't have the money for the restitution or don't have the assets they can use as a bargaining chip may get more severe criminal punishments, according to Alex Crite, associate professor at the Thomas Jefferson School of Law in San Diego. Since Eister took office, 357 defendants have paid restitution. About 20 of those violated their probation, resulting in 6-month jail terms and new charges. It's basically a unified payment system to buy your way to a lower level of punishment, said Crite, adding that the payoffs could motivate the cops to engage in treasure hunts. An example of how the restitution program works gives plenty of cause for concern. When 57-year-old Bob Alexander, who wears an implanted spinal cord stimulator to control pain, was questioned by an officer in August after he pulled up to a gas pump, the officer claimed Alexander had been speeding. He revealed that he had some marijuana in the car and presented his doctor's authorization. After the cop also learned that Alexander had $10,788 in cash, which he said he planned to use to buy his daughter a car, the Mendocino Major Crimes Task Force was called in. Alexander said he was handcuffed to a table as cops asked, quote, whom he worked for. One of the cops got out an asset seizure form. You can sign this paper and say this money isn't yours, and we can just call it a day, Alexander quoted the cop as telling him. No criminal charges were filed, but Alexander had to fight 8 months to get his $10,000 back. An administrator for the task force, which questioned Alexander, claimed it is not our policy to pressure subjects into giving up cash. Mendocino County Sheriff Tom Allman credits restitution and forfeitures for his budget being $600,000 in the black. He's also been able to purchase a shiny new fleet of patrol cars. Before we go this week, there is a must-read story on tokesignals.com by Todd Brendan Fahey, and it is an interview with the author Are You Serious? You definitely want to check that out if you are interested in the evolution of psychedelic underground publishing through the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Todd Brendan Fahey, in his always entertaining style, does a freewheeling interview with Are You Serious? And that is not to be missed. Check it out on tokesignals.com. Until we meet again next week, I hope you decide to stay lifted. See you then.